Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking, Debbie Buyaki. Welcome aboard. Today we'll be taking a flight over nature's view, a 2030 climate journey story, kicking off from Nairobi, straight to Bonn in Germany. And I hope you enjoy this climate journey story. Seatbelts on and wheels up. Over season 1, we talked about major actors or even contributors to climate change, and they were quite heart-wrenching. And on the 3rd of July 2023, the world's hottest temperatures ever recorded were marked. In climate change recently, I have been wondering if we're fighting a losing war, each in this little battle pulling up from different sides to try and avert this climate and ecological crisis. And as I mentioned in season 1, we'll be having guest experts, and this is something my guests mentioned to me previously. As long as you have an experience in something or you've gone through something, you qualify to be labeled an expert in speaking about it. So this is also to everyone listening. Don't be looked down upon if you don't have the title of expert. So today we'll talk about climate change emotions. This is a middle of the middle episode. It's episode 15. And it's also the mid of season 2, middle of the middle. We're going to take a breather and talk about how all these discussions have and will be impacting our emotions going forward. But before I do that, I'd like to read the bio of my speaker. I don't know if I should give out her name. Maybe not. So Dash is the sustainability and regeneration solutions designer, who's great, who collaborates with Sustainable Pathways to guide diverse enterprises towards sustainability. Her role in the Inner Development Goals Hub as a climate circle facilitator with One Brazilian Earth underscores her commitment to environmental stewardship and human connectivity. Currently, she is collaborating with Region Tribe to develop regenerative neighborhoods. Dash also hosts the Region Wings podcast. I will link that to highlight inner wisdom and practical solutions to regeneration. Her mission to imagine, design, and create a regenerative economy and future is what defines her. That being said, which is quite a simple and nice introduction, I'd like to introduce our guest and let's hear her beautiful voice. So over to you. Would you tell us your name, where you're from, and what you're currently into?
Perfect. I love that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Lila. I'm Brazilian. I grew up in the United States, and I've been living in Germany for the last 6 years. So whenever somebody asks where I'm from, it's a bit hard. I'm a migrant for life. And as Debbie has mentioned, my goal is to work on regeneration and to help us imagine a brighter future while being aware of the climate crisis, the environmental crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the intersectional crisis we're living. But how can we imagine and work together for a better future?
All right, that's really interesting. I think the word crisis is something we need to start getting used to. Not in a negative way, but in a way to channel action to positivity. So my first question is, what are climate change related emotions?
I think 3 are the ones that I hear the most, especially when it comes to climate circles that I host every single week. And people from different parts of the world come in to talk about their feelings, their emotions, to vent, and for us to put away our toxic positivity for a while. The first one that always comes up is guilt. People feel guilty. They feel like they can do more, they want to do more, but that they don't have the power to make change. And the second one connects really well with that is this sense of powerlessness, that I'm not big enough, I don't have the right role, as you mentioned before, I'm not part of a government or a large corporation. And the third one is grief. People are sad. And they should be sad because climate anxiety are real and valid responses to the world that we're living in. And it would be actually a little bit strange if we were all hunky-dory and happy, knowing through very detailed scientific reports what is waiting for us in the next 50 to 100 years.
I think we will talk about climate circles towards the end. I found out about climate change related emotions through climate circles. because we don't talk about it as much in the climate field, we just move on and dive into action, arrest the criminals or stop oil or keep the degrees to 1.5, and we never talk about the emotional side of that. But we don't wait to see as well all this fighting is toxic to some extent or hurts us in a sense. So guilt, powerlessness, and grief are very visible, and most people, including myself, 2 years ago, didn't even know that what I was feeling had a name and to some extent a reason to it. I'm hoping, as is the tone of this podcast, to give hope, even though we know it might not be good, or if we don't take actions, bad things might happen. So let's still keep the hope. But moving on to the next question. How do we address the actual symptoms as opposed to masking them behind taking action, reducing your carbon footprint, or keeping it 1.5 degrees? How do we address the root causes of these emotions, anxiety and apathy, without masking behind action? It's more like escapism. You escape your feelings by acting or trying to do something about it. So how do you address that root feeling?
My perspective is that we first need to talk about it. We need to make it very, very common in the workplace, in schools and universities, that this is happening, how we feel about it, and how is this affecting our day-to-day lives. The second is that climate change is not a cause in itself. It's not siloed. It fits within a system of oppression. It fits within a system of classism. It fits in with a system of racism, gender violence, and many, many other things. And so I think here we need to understand, what are we spending our time on? What is the work that we're doing? Which is why a lot of my work is helping people understand that every job can be a climate job, and that there's a lot of better jobs out there that they can work towards the planet. And that first we need to understand, what are we spending our time on? And what are we spending our money on? So where your money goes is where change or continuation of the system maintains itself. So what are you spending your time on? How many hours are you spending your time on? And who are you connected with? So the third one I would say is community. You cannot solve any type of emotional distress on your own. Your mind is not a reliable source to give you comfort on its own. You need community. You are a social creature. You need people, you need elders, you need younger people to motivate you and give you hope. And you need elders that have been there for 20, 30 years to support you on your way, to also motivate you. And so my answer is see where you're spending your time on. See if you can spend it on better things. See where you're spending your money on, and connect with community.
I told you she was great. I think we had a big discussion during COP28 on money and where the money is going, and it breaks down to individualistic action. Sometimes it's also scaling up to governments, that we need to cut both ends on demand and supply of the actions that fuel climate change. At the same time, you can not only call for the end of fossil fuels without giving an alternative to what people use. It's just where the money goes sometimes, which is quite key on this planet as of now, and is where the climate change in your country or your location will go. So I think it's quite interesting that you also touched on how money is quite important. Please go to restaurants that serve green food or promote businesses that are green. As we already discussed on food production and how to support that industry in a green way and climate-friendly way. But anyway, now to the next question. We know, as society has taught most of us to be, especially in the West, not inclined to feel things or not express things as they are, but to try to tone them down and mask them down as per your environment or as per your audience or as where you are. You're just taught to not be too brutal. How do you suggest that young people or anyone who is feeling climate anxieties or all these other different emotions related to that, how do you advise them to express them to the different audiences and environments?
To be totally honest, I would say learn to express your positive emotions first. Like, when was the last time you told your grandparents you love them? My grandparents are from very old generation that they never said I love you. And a couple years ago, I started saying it to them, and my grandma now says it. And that gave me kind of initiative to be able to talk more about my positive emotions, how I loved my friends and how I love this and how I'm connected with somebody and how somebody inspires me. Because the moment you're able to talk about your positive emotions, it will give you a little bit more of understanding of how to best express your negative emotions. And then when it comes to negative emotions, find safe spaces. So the climate circles that are a collaboration with One Resilient Earth, that's a great place that you can go every single week. There's multiple people there, not just me, that have created a space for you to just go there and vent and talk about everything you're angry and upset with. And that will be a good place for you to learn how to, in a safe place, start talking about that. And then the third thing I would say is it's also important to be able to share your negative emotions in a way that people will understand. So what I've learned in the last couple of years is I can't go to my father and tell my father, yeah, because climate change and the carbon and the insetting, and this is making me upset, because he's not going to be able to reciprocate that feeling back to me because he doesn't understand. But what he does understand is, oh, well, I'm not hearing the birds that much, and that makes me sad. Oh, I noticed that we don't see any more bees, and I think that's because of the chemicals that are being put in the agriculture that are killing the bees, and that makes me angry. So how can you find people that can relate to your negative feelings in a way that it also relates to them, and make it very, very, very simple and very connected with real life, with real life things that people can see and can touch and that they are also experiencing.
I think it's quite great also that the conversation leads to an intergenerational conversation on how you can say the same thing using different words to mean the same thing across generations and even to younger people, even though they're more tech oriented. I think your answer is quite interesting on communicating in a language that they would understand as opposed to what you only would understand. And having communicated to them, this goes to the next question. How do you address climate deniers? That is also one of the responses to the huge impacts of climate change, by denying the potential magnitude. This is a conversation I once had with the founder of One Resilient Earth, and she was explaining that people sometimes don't deny because they're denying, but it's because it's too huge for them to understand it and to think of a life with it. And they just deny it as a form of grief. And so, to the question, how do you address the climate deniers in a way that they understand and also don't feel attacked?
My first suggestion is go read Katharine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us. She's a climate scientist, and she talks a lot about this. My second point is, do you have to talk to climate deniers? If you look into the number of people that believe in climate change, the people that are working towards climate change, they are the most important. So maybe you need to talk more to the people on the fence and not necessarily to spend so much of your time and energy and emotional capacity speaking to people that I agree with One Resilient Earth, that it's not that they deny it, it's just that they don't understand. But if you're at a family dinner or you're somewhere and you have this climate denier coming up to you, first and foremost, try to be the bigger person. And I know that's hard and I know that's not always possible, but how can you connect to this person's humanity? What does this person care about? Do they care about their children? Do they care about their farm? Do they care about their business? What do they care about? And then in there, remove all of the jargon and just explain to them how, because of rising temperatures, because of lack of biodiversity or animals in your local region, X, Y, Z is going to happen. So as an example that Katharine Hayhoe in her book gives, and I've read her book a couple years ago, so there might be some in between the lines reading, but basically she says when you're speaking to a farmer, don't talk about kind of these very large jargon. Say, hey, I've noticed that it's been raining a lot less. Is this affecting your crops? And then that person's probably going to go down, yes, I'm spending so much more money on fertilizers and I'm spending so much more money on water now. It's crazy. So then you get them to kind of shift their way of thinking about the world. Instead of it being a problem that they need to be addressed, they first need to understand how it is impacting them. And that's not always easy and that's not always possible. So I just want to also reassure people that have been face to face with people who, I don't even call them climate deniers, I just call them people that like to stir up fights. Don't feel like you need to talk to these people necessarily to change their mind. Your time and effort might be more and more useful talking to people on the fence or people that understand that this is a problem. They just don't know how they can get involved.
Pick the right fights is the moral of this story.
100%.
And on the other spectrum, that's the youth and mostly teenagers are scared of the future because of the impacts of climate change. How do you address the issue of climate change and its realities without scaring them? And this being for broad audiences to people who work with youth, teens, teachers, parents, guardians. How do you address the issues of climate change and the reality without scaring the younger ones?
I think this is helping people reimagine the future, which is why I really like the term regeneration, but there's also the well-being economy. There's multiple ways that we can look about it. But instead of us trying to fix a problem, can we imagine a better way to live? So can we imagine, instead of us living in large cities, separated in cubicles and pods alone by ourselves, can we imagine living in a community? And that can be in a city, that can be in nature, that can be in an eco-village, that can be in a regenerative neighborhood, whatever that means to you. Can we find ways that we can be supported financially together through some type of economic solidarity? So we're not having to necessarily work in places where we're dependent on money. And then we, of course, make decisions that might not be the best decisions from a climate perspective on where we're working. And then the next one is make sure that you have people around you that are going to support you. So you're going to get old. And the way that we're thinking about the world now is very individualistic. Oh, I need to save money. I need to have a retirement fund. I need to have a house. I need to have an apartment. How can you imagine a world and really let people have fun with this? Like, imagine you and your 10 best friends all pull together, get together and decide to start a regenerative neighborhood together. Your kids can play together. You can all support and have your own urban garden. You can work together in bioregions. Think about the better world that you can create, because what we need to do now is we need to adapt. We need to adapt to the reality that's coming. In my mind, I think that we need to spend a little bit less time yelling about the problem and a lot more time yelling about the adaptation and solutions and inspirations that we can give people, so people can start doing something to prepare themselves for what's coming.
I did see last week that a group of 30 best friends built a whole village to live together, so it's possible.
Incredible, it is.
This is indeed the world we have now, and it's not as rosy as our grandparents told us or used to tell us. The rivers, the birds, the food was fresh and everything, but this is what we have now. So how do we work with it, and how do we make it work for the future? Considering now, instead of the 7 years, as of December 2023, the climate clock came down to 5 years. Enough of the problem and the finger pointing and blaming though. And now looking into solutions and how to adopt into them moving forward. You talked about community, and now going a bit into that direction. We value the essence of community, going into something called climate circles from One Resilient Earth. I have shouted out this guy so much. You should check them out. And how sharing your deepest fears in a language that people understand, or even your language, is something so powerful. What would you speak on about community that could be used by anyone who's having climate change related anxieties, to find a community that helps them address all these problems and ultimately to take action to avert the crisis? This is quite a big question, because not everyone will join One Resilient Earth, but there's someone who knows some friends that they meet up every Wednesday. And how can they turn that into a community, their community, for themselves across the world?
I would say take a minute to pause and think about, in your city, who are the people that you also think that they care about climate change? So that's probably a psychologist, that's maybe a teacher, that's maybe the person that works in the environmental area in the government, maybe the university. Find these people and say, hey, I am wanting to put a group together for us to come together and discuss how we're feeling. And you have a lot of expertise in this, and I think that could help a lot of people. And then see what they think about it and put something together and say, okay, we're going to get together on Saturday or on Thursday night for an hour, and we're going to talk. And try to do that in a place that's a communal place, like a library or a museum, and just allow people to come. Ask people to, everybody, one person brings the cookies, somebody brings some juice, to really try to understand that as humans, there's nothing more impactful than food that brings us together. And from there, you can learn to be upset and you can learn how to be angry. And at the same time, you can meet some wonderful people that maybe you can call on and say, hey, do you want to just grab a coffee in the afternoon one day? So don't think about it as something super, super grandiose, but at the same time, understand that you are not alone. You are not the only person feeling this. It is common to be feeling this. You are very right to be feeling something like this when we're living through a crisis, and other people in your community are as well. And I am 100% sure that those people can support you and that you can support them. Don't ever, ever doubt your potential as a human to help somebody through their feelings. Even if you are 12 or 13 years old, you have so much to teach. And even if you are 80 years old, you have so much to teach. So make sure that you're supporting your community, because honestly, that's all we have.
That's sweet. Anyone and everyone can join in. I think it'd be great if you could have older generations to tell you certain stuff. I'm in the craze right now of learning indigenous knowledge and how they coexisted with things that we're having trouble right now. For example, I'm a tree planter, and of course, weeds are something that's a big problem. But hundreds of years ago, they were still a problem, and they had ways of dealing with those weeds. And I think a community can teach you so much, especially if you're learning from people with nature experience.
Can I give 2 book recommendations before you go? The first one, and essential to everybody, should be Braiding Sweetgrass. Make sure you read that book. And one that I'm reading now is called Sand Talk. So we need to find ways to interact with literature that has not been formulated through and by the West. So really recommend those 2.
What will be your last comments on this topic?
Find community, find people that care. You can't do this alone, and you are human. So make sure you give yourself time to feel and to think and to enjoy the one only life you have on the only one planet we have that has life in it. So also make sure that you make time for joy.
Oh my gosh, this is such a powerful message. And to wind down, this is possible, of course. And I hope you don't feel alone or lost. You can plug into different communities from the locations that you're in, or online as well. Everything is possible online these days. Or you could hit me up here at Flight Over Nature's View. And one thing we're always emphasizing is there's hope, and hope mostly if there's action. It doesn't mean you ignore or don't feel your emotions. You need to feel them, but also take action to avert the climate crisis in your own way. And collectively, our actions will lead towards a sustainable planet and regenerative planet, and we'll be all right. Just don't worry. We need to get ourselves up and take action together. I hope to see you on the next flight, and this was such a wonderful and therapeutic episode. See you on the next flight for Earth.